I fell in love with 3 friends at once, and I couldn't walk for 3 days. When I woke up after that weekend, my body ached and my heart was torn in 3 directions. What happens when love crosses the lines of friendship, pulling you into a whirlwind of emotions you never expected? This isn't just about a mistake. It's about how one unforgettable weekend changed everything. Subscribe to join me in this emotional journey and let me know in the comments where you're watching from today. I open my eyes to the dim light filtering through the sheer curtains of my apartment. My entire body ached, not in a painful way, but in that subtle, lingering soreness that whispered memories of what had happened over the weekend. My mind raced, replaying every touch, every glance, and every whispered word. The events of the last 3 days felt surreal, like something out of one of those romance novels I used to laugh at. How could I have been so blind to the undercurrents swirling beneath my closest friendships? How did I let myself fall for Alex's charm, Ben's quiet strength, and Marcus's unrelenting passion, all at the same time? My phone buzzed on the nightstand, jolting me out of my thoughts. The text preview read, "We need to talk about what happened." It was from Alex. My heart dropped. The implications of that message sent a rush of anxiety through me, and suddenly the memories of the weekend didn't feel so warm anymore. It had started innocently enough. We were a group of lifelong friends, a quartet bound by shared history and a love for spontaneous adventures. The weekend getaway to the secluded mountain cabin was Alex's idea. "I think we all need a break," he had said with his usual charismatic grin when he proposed it a few weeks ago. "Work, life, it's been too much lately. Let's unplug." Marcus, ever the thrill-seeker, was immediately on board. "Count me in. But only if there's hiking. None of that sitting around the fire nonsense." Ben, who was more reserved but always dependable, nodded in quiet agreement. I could use the fresh air. And me? I was eager to escape my studio apartment, where the walls had started to feel like they were closing in on me. I was an artist, but inspiration had been elusive, and my canvas was filled with half-finished attempts at brilliance. The cabin was tucked away in the woods, a cozy retreat that seemed tailor-made for bonding and unwinding. But from the moment we arrived, the air felt different, charged, as if the forest itself was alive with secrets, waiting to unfold. That first night, we gathered around the fireplace, laughing and reminiscing over glasses of wine. Alex, always the life of the party, kept us entertained with stories, his deep laughter infectious. But there was something in the way his eyes lingered on me when he thought I wasn't looking. A heat that wasn't there before. "Lisa," he said at one point, leaning in just slightly, "you've changed. You seem, I don't know, more confident lately. It's a good look on you." I liked it. Lisa laughed, then pained, and then I brushed off the compliment with a laugh, but my cheeks betrayed me, burning with a blush I hoped the firelight would hide. Later, when the others had gone to bed, Ben stayed behind to help me clean up. "You shouldn't let Alex get to you," he said softly, stacking the empty glasses. "Get to me?" I asked, feigning ignorance. Ben hesitated, his hand stilling on the counter. "You're important to him, to all of us. I just don't want him to complicate things for you." He took a long moment before answering. There was something unspoken in his words, something that made me look up at him. His eyes held a quiet intensity, the kind that made my pulse quicken. But before I could respond, he shook his head and excused himself, leaving me alone with a storm of thoughts. I faced that nightmare. The next day brought more surprises. Marcus, true to his adventurous spirit, dragged us on a grueling hike up the mountain. Despite my protests, I found myself laughing at his relentless energy. No need to leave me," I whispered, running a hand through my hair. "Come on, Lisa," he called back to me as I lagged behind. "Where's that fire I know you have?" When we reached the summit, he pulled me aside, away from the others. "And this," he said, gesturing to the breathtaking view of the valley below, "is what life is about. Taking risks, going for what you want. Don't you agree?" His question felt like more than just a casual observation, especially when his hand brushed mine. My breath hitched, and, for a moment, the world seemed to narrow to just the two of us. That evening, everything came to a head. We played a game, something silly and meant to pass the time. But the questions grew more personal, the dares bolder. When it was Alex's turn, he didn't hesitate. "I dare Lisa," he said, locking eyes with me, "to tell us who she's closest to in this group." The room fell silent, the tension almost palpable. I laughed nervously, trying to deflect. "That's impossible. You're all like brothers to me." Alex's smirk faltered, replaced by something more serious. "You know that's not true." His words hung in the air, and I felt Marcus and Ben's gazes on me, each of them waiting for something, an answer, a sign. As we waited, what was I supposed to do? A lump formed in my throat as I realized the impossible truth. I cared for all three of them, in ways I couldn't fully understand or articulate. As the weekend unfolded, each moment deepened my confusion. Private conversations, lingering touches, and stolen glances blurred the lines of friendship and desire. By the final night, the tension had boiled over into something inevitable, something that left us all changed. And now, back in my apartment, the memories were as vivid as the aches in my body. Alex's message stared back at me from the screen, demanding an answer I wasn't sure I could give. I set the phone down and curled up on the couch, staring out the window as the city buzzed below. The weekend had been beautiful, messy, and utterly transformative. But what came next? How could I face Alex, Ben, and Marcus after what had happened? How could I go back to being just friends when I had crossed a line with all of them? My phone buzzed again. This time it was Marcus. His text was simple but no less daunting. "Can we talk?" I sighed, running a hand through my hair. The fallout was only beginning, and I had no idea how to navigate it. But one thing was certain. I couldn't ignore what had happened. Not anymore. The buzzing of my phone had become a persistent reminder that life wasn't waiting for me to sort through the tangled mess I'd created. I silenced it for the third time and tried to focus on the coffee steaming in front of me, but even that was impossible. My mind wandered back to the weekend, to the very beginning, when everything still felt normal. It was Friday afternoon when Alex picked me up in his sleek black SUV. He arrived early, leaning against the car with a cocky grin that could only belong to him. "Ready for an unforgettable weekend?" he asked as I approached, his dark sunglasses hiding whatever mischief was brewing in his eyes. I rolled mine in response. "You've been hyping this trip for weeks. I'm almost scared to see what you have planned." "Don't worry," he said, opening the passenger door for me. "You're in good hands." The drive to the cabin was filled with music and banter, Alex as animated as ever. He always had a way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room, or, in this case, the car. Every joke was perfectly timed, every glance just long enough to keep you hooked. And yet, beneath the surface of his playful charm, there was something else. A weight, perhaps, like he was carrying a secret he wasn't ready to share. We picked up Ben next. He lived on the quieter side of town, in a modest house that matched his reserved personality. When he climbed into the back seat, his presence brought an immediate sense of calm. "Hey, Lisa," he greeted me with a warm smile. His voice was steady, familiar, like the hum of a favorite song. "You look ready for some fresh air, and you look ready to escape your spreadsheets," I teased back, earning a rare chuckle from him. Alex chimed in. "Ben doesn't just escape, he calculates every step of the way." Ben rolled his eyes good-naturedly, says the guy who plans nothing and somehow always lands on his feet. As the two of them bantered, I found myself smiling. They were polar opposites in many ways, but that's what made their friendship work. And in some inexplicable way, I felt like I was the bridge between them, a balance of Alex's impulsiveness and Ben's steadiness. We picked up Marcus last. He bounded out of his apartment building with the kind of energy that could fill a stadium. His duffel bag slung carelessly over one shoulder, he waved enthusiastically as we pulled up. "Finally," he exclaimed, throwing his bag into the trunk before climbing into the seat next to Ben. "I thought you'd leave without me." "As if we could survive a trip without your endless commentary," Alex quipped. Marcus leaned forward, resting his elbows on the front seats. "You'd be bored to death, and you know it." His eyes met mine, a playful glint sparking between us. "So, Lisa, you ready to finally let loose this weekend?" I laughed, shaking my head. "Let loose how? You've got some scheme up your sleeve, don't you?" "Who, me?" he said, feigning innocence. "I'm just here to make sure you all don't spend the whole weekend being boring." Marie's shoulders slumped, not helped by the new all mixed together in one confusing clump. The truth was, Marcus had a knack for pulling me out of my comfort zone, whether it was convincing me to try bungee jumping last summer, or dragging me to a spontaneous midnight karaoke session. He always knew how to make life feel bigger, louder, more alive. And as much as I resisted at times, I secretly loved it. The cabin was nestled deep in the woods, its rustic charm straight out of a magazine. A wide porch wrapped around the front, and inside, the warm glow of wood-paneled walls and a stone fireplace greeted us. We unpacked quickly, eager to settle in and start the weekend. That first evening felt like a reunion. Alex had brought a collection of vintage records, which he insisted on playing as we sat around the fireplace. Marcus dominated the conversation as always, while Ben occasionally chimed in with dry humor that had us all laughing. And then there was Alex, whose charm filled every pause, whose gaze lingered just a second too long when it landed on me. "Remember the camping trip 2 years ago?" Marcus asked, leaning back in his chair, "when Lisa freaked out over the raccoon?" I groaned. I did not freak out, I was startled. "Startled? You screamed so loud I thought a bear was attacking you," he said, doubling over with laughter. Alex joined in, grinning. "To be fair, it was a pretty aggressive raccoon." "And who saved the day?" Ben added with a smirk. "Me, because I'm the only one here with any survival skills." The group erupted in laughter, and I found myself caught in the warmth of it all. These were my people, my safe place, or so I thought. By the second day, the lines between friendship and something more began to blur. It started subtly, Alex brushing his hand against mine as he passed me a cup of coffee. Ben offering me his jacket when the morning air turned chilly, Marcus pulling me aside during a hike to point out a hidden waterfall. Each moment seemed innocent enough, but together they painted a picture I wasn't ready to look at. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Alex suggested we play a game. "Something to spice things up," he said with a grin. The game was simple. Truth or dare, but with a twist. Each truth had to reveal something you'd never told the group before, and each dare had to involve another person in the room. When it was Marcus's turn, he dared Alex to share the most romantic thing he'd ever done. Alex hesitated, his eyes flicking to mine. "Well," he began, his voice softer than usual. "There was this one time I planned an entire day around someone's favorite things. Breakfast at her favorite cafe, a surprise visit to an art gallery, and a sunset picnic. It wasn't much, but I think it made her happy." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of his words settling over us. I felt my cheeks flush, wondering if I was the someone he was referring to. But before I could dwell on it, Ben spoke up. "That's hard to beat," he said, his tone light but his expression unreadable. "But I think we should hear Lisa's next truth." I glanced at him, then at the others. "My truth?" I asked, stalling for time. "Yeah," Marcus said, leaning forward. "Tell us something you've been keeping from us." She pressed her lips together. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. Should I admit the growing feelings I didn't fully understand? Should I confess that the dynamics of this group were starting to overwhelm me? Instead, I went with a safe answer. "Fine," I said, forcing a smile. "Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if I hadn't met you guys." The words felt hollow as soon as they left my mouth, but the tension in the room eased. The conversation moved on, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The rest of the weekend was a blur of moments that left me spinning. Ben's quiet reassurances, Alex's bold flirtations, Marcus's infectious energy. They all pulled me in different directions, leaving me torn and exhilarated all at once. And yet, I couldn't deny the truth. I was falling for all three of them, each in their own unique way. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the wooden beams above me, I realized I was at a crossroads. What had started as a simple weekend getaway had become something far more complicated, and I wasn't sure any of us would leave this cabin the same. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the cabin windows, and the air buzzed with a subtle tension that hadn't been there before. Breakfast was a quiet affair. The usual banter was replaced by a tentative silence, broken only by the clinking of plates and mugs. I kept my eyes on my coffee, hoping no one would address the lingering unease that had crept in overnight. But Marcus, never one to let silence linger, broke the ice. "All right, enough of this awkwardness," he declared, pushing his chair back. "Today's the day we conquer the summit." Alex groaned. "Do we have to?" "I vote we stay here and enjoy the view from the porch." "No chance," Marcus shot back with a grin. "Lisa, back me up here. You're always up for an adventure, right?" I hesitated, glancing at Alex, who raised a teasing eyebrow. "If you want to walk up a mountain just to sweat, go for it," he said. "I'll be here waiting with cold drinks." Ben, ever the mediator, intervened. "I'll go, but only if Lisa wants to." All three of them turned to me, their gazes heavy with expectation. My heart raced as I tried to decipher their expressions. Alex's playful smirk, Ben's steady calm, Marcus's eager energy. It was too much. Just as Eric and Max had intended, they parroted the question. "Let's hike," I said finally, forcing a smile. "We're here to get away, right?" Marcus whooped in victory, and Alex rolled his eyes dramatically but stood up to grab his boots. Ben gave me a small nod, his approval a quiet reassurance. The hike was more grueling than I'd anticipated. The trail was steep, the air thin, and the sun relentless. Marcus led the way, his enthusiasm undeterred by the challenging terrain. Alex stayed close to me, occasionally offering a hand when the path grew treacherous. Ben brought up the rear, his quiet presence steady and reassuring. Halfway up, Marcus called for a break. We collapsed onto a rocky outcrop overlooking the valley, the view breathtaking despite the exhaustion. I leaned back, letting the cool breeze wash over me, and closed my eyes. "You're tougher than you look," Alex teased, sitting down beside me. I opened one eye to glare at him. "Is that supposed to be a compliment?" "Absolutely," he said, his grin disarming. "You're full of surprises, Lisa." Before I could respond, Marcus joined us, his energy undiminished. "This is what life's about," he said, gesturing to the vast expanse before us. "Moments like this, moments of—" I nodded, unsure of what to say. The view was stunning, but the weight of the weekend pressed down on me. My feelings for each of them were becoming impossible to ignore, and the hike wasn't helping. Every smile, every touch, every shared moment seemed to pull me deeper into the chaos. The summit was everything Marcus had promised, a sweeping panorama of rolling hills, dense forests, and a sky so blue it seemed endless. We sat in awe, the silence this time comfortable, even sacred. Alex was the first to speak. "You know, we don't do this enough." "Do what?" I asked, glancing at him. "Spend time together." "Really together," he said, his voice uncharacteristically serious. "Life gets so busy, and we forget what matters." Marcus nodded, his usual bravado softened. "He's right. It's easy to lose sight of things." Ben, sitting slightly apart from the group, added quietly, "That's why we're here, to remember." His words hit me harder than I expected. This trip was supposed to be a simple getaway, a chance to unwind, but it had become so much more. A reminder of the connections that bound us, the complexities that made them both beautiful and painful. As we began the descent, the mood shifted again. The air between us was charged, each interaction layered with unspoken meaning. Alex's hand lingered on my arm a second too long as he helped me over a rough patch. Marcus's laughter was louder, more vibrant, as if trying to drown out the tension. Ben's eyes met mine more often, his gaze searching for something I couldn't name. By the time we reached the cabin, I was emotionally drained. I excused myself, claiming exhaustion, and retreated to my room. But rest was impossible. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions, each one louder than the last. That evening, the storm finally broke. We gathered around the fireplace again, the mood heavier than the night before. Alex poured drinks, his usual charm muted. Marcus was uncharacteristically quiet, staring into the flames as if searching for answers. Ben sat close to me, his presence a small comfort in the growing tension. When he spoke, it was to say something. "All right," Alex said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Enough dancing around it. We need to talk." I froze, my heart pounding. About what? You know what? He said, his voice steady but firm. This. Whatever's happening here. Marcus looked up, his expression conflicted. Alex, maybe now isn't the time. It is, Alex cut him off. We can't keep pretending everything's fine when it's clearly not. Ben shifted uncomfortably but said nothing, his silence a tacit agreement. All eyes turned to me, and I felt like a deer caught in headlights. What do you want me to say? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She moaned. The truth, Alex said, his gaze piercing. About how you feel. I swallowed hard, the weight of their expectations crushing. I don't know, I admitted. I don't know how I feel. This weekend, it's been amazing, but it's also been confusing. I care about all of you. I just don't know what that means. The room was silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. I am here in the present. You don't have to figure it out right now, he said, but you can't avoid it forever. Alex sighed, running a hand through his hair. He's right. We need to figure this out, Lisa. For all our sakes. Ben finally spoke, his tone calm but firm. Whatever happens, we'll get through it, together. His words brought a small measure of relief, but the weight of the situation remained. The night ended on an uncertain note, each of us retreating to our rooms with more questions than answers. As I lay in bed, staring at the shadows dancing on the ceiling, I couldn't escape the truth. This trip had changed everything. The lines between friendship and love had blurred, and there was no going back. The catalyst had been set in motion, and the fallout was just beginning. And then, the morning after Alex's declaration, the cabin felt like it was holding its breath. The usual sounds of laughter and banter over breakfast were replaced with an eerie quiet. I moved about the kitchen, pouring coffee and buttering toast, trying to distract myself from the weight of the previous night's conversation. Marcus broke the silence first. He leaned against the door frame, his arms crossed, watching me with an expression that was unreadable. "Sleep well?" he asked, his voice casual but edged with tension. I turned, offering a half-hearted smile. "Not really. You?" He shrugged. "Could have been better?" Ben entered the kitchen next, his quiet demeanor as steady as always. "Morning," he said simply, his eyes flickering between Marcus and me. Alex was last, his presence commanding as he strolled in, grabbing a coffee mug without a word. The air crackled with unspoken tension, the four of us caught in a web of emotions, too tangled to unravel. The group decided to split up for the day, an unspoken agreement to diffuse the tension. Marcus insisted on taking me to explore a hidden trail he'd read about, while Alex and Ben stayed behind, claiming they had things to sort out at the cabin. As Marcus and I hiked through the dense forest, his usual energy was tempered by something more serious. He stopped abruptly at a clearing, the sunlight filtering through the trees, casting patterns on the ground. "Lisa," he said, turning to face me, "we need to talk." I froze, the words hitting me like a wave. "About what?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. He took a step closer, his expression earnest. "About us. About what this weekend has brought to the surface." I swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. "Marcus, He held up a hand to stop me. "Let me finish. I know I can be a lot. Too much, even. But I care about you, Lisa, more than I've ever admitted, even to myself. and I can't keep pretending I don't. His confession hung in the air, raw and vulnerable. My heart ached, both for him and for the impossible situation we were in. Marcus, I care about you too, I said carefully, but it's not that simple. It never is, he replied with a bitter laugh. But it doesn't mean we shouldn't try. I didn't know how to answer, so I said nothing. We continued the hike in silence, the weight of his words pressing down on us. When we returned to the cabin, the tension had only grown. Alex was sitting on the porch steps, his jaw tight and his gaze distant. Ben stood nearby, his arms crossed as he stared out at the forest. "Everything okay?" I asked hesitantly. Alex glanced up at me, his expression softening. "Depends on your definition of okay." Ben didn't say anything, but the look he gave me spoke volumes. Whatever had happened while we were gone, it had deepened the divide between them. I said in a low voice, "That evening, it all came to a head." We sat around the fireplace again, the unspoken conflict simmering just beneath the surface. Alex was the first to break the silence. "Give me your hand." "All right," he said, his voice steady but firm. "I'm done tiptoeing around this. Lisa, we need answers." I blinked, caught off guard by his bluntness. "Answers to what?" "To this," he said, gesturing between the four of us. "To whatever's happening here. You can't keep us all in limbo." "Alex," Ben interjected, his tone calm but edged with frustration. "This isn't just about Lisa. We're all struggling to figure this out." "Speak for yourself," Marcus muttered, earning a sharp look from Alex. "Enough," I said, my voice cutting through the tension. "I know this is a mess. Believe me, I feel it too, but you're all putting me in an impossible position." "We're not asking for perfection," Alex said, his voice softening. "We just need to know where we stand." The room fell silent as they all looked at me, their gazes heavy with expectation. My heart pounded in my chest, the weight of their emotions threatening to crush me. "I don't know," I admitted finally, my voice trembling. "I care about all of you in different ways, but I don't know what that means yet." Alex sighed, running a hand through his hair. "That's not good enough, Lisa." Marcus stood abruptly, his frustration evident. "Maybe we're asking too much," he said, his tone biting. "Maybe we shouldn't have come on this trip at all." I shook my head. Ben remained quiet, his expression unreadable, but when he finally spoke, his words were measured and calm. "We can't undo what's happened, but we can decide how to move forward." His words brought a measure of clarity, though the path ahead remained uncertain. The night ended with the group fractured, each of us retreating to our rooms with more questions than answers. As I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't escape the truth. This trip had brought everything to the surface. The unspoken feelings, the hidden tensions, the messy, beautiful complexity of our relationships. And now, there was no going back. The breaking point had been reached. What came next would define everything. 1. The next morning, the cabin felt emptier, even though everyone was still there. The silence wasn't from rest or peace. It was from tension. Alex was outside on the porch, staring out into the woods. Marcus had gone for an early run, leaving a trail of stomping frustration in his wake. Ben was in the kitchen, quietly making coffee like nothing had changed. And me? I stayed in my room, trying to gather the courage to face them. But I couldn't hide forever. When I finally stepped into the main room, Ben was the first to notice. "Morning," he said softly, sliding a mug of coffee toward me. "Thanks," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. We stood there for a moment, the quiet between us less tense than comforting. That was Ben's way, steady, reliable, a calm amidst the chaos. Then, "You okay?" he asked finally, his eyes meeting mine. I shrugged. "I don't know, I feel like I've ruined everything." He shook his head. "You didn't ruin anything, Lisa. We're all just processing." Before I could respond, Marcus stormed through the door, his hair damp with sweat and his expression stormy. He barely looked at me as he grabbed a water bottle and leaned against the counter. "Morning," he muttered, more out of habit than intention. Alex joined us next, his entrance as effortless as always, though the usual spark in his eyes was missing. He glanced at me briefly before focusing on the others. "We need to talk," he said, his tone clipped. "Do we?" Marcus shot back, his frustration bubbling to the surface, because talking hasn't exactly been working for us. Alex ignored him, his gaze steady on me. "Lisa, you said you needed time. Fine, but we can't keep going like this. We can't go faster, can we?" "I know," I said, my voice trembling. "I know we need to figure this out, but it's not just about me. It's about all of us." Ben cleared his throat, his voice calm but firm. "Then maybe we should start by saying what we want. Honestly." The room fell silent as his words hung in the air. Finally, Alex spoke. "I want clarity," he said, his voice steady. "I've been in love with you for a long time, Lisa. But I need to know if there's a chance for us, or if I'm just holding on to something that isn't real." "To get him to say it plainly," Brendan said. My breath caught at his words, the weight of his confession hitting me like a wave. I opened my mouth to respond, but Marcus cut in. "As you slowly process everything that happened, I think you will come to a place of peace." "Are you serious?" he said, his voice sharp. "You think this is about you? You're not the only one with feelings here, Alex." "And what about you, Marcus?" Alex snapped, his frustration boiling over. "You're all about the thrill, the adventure. But do you even know what it means to love someone?" "That's enough," Ben said, his tone firm but calm. "This isn't about who loves Lisa more. It's about figuring out what's best for all of us." The tension in the room was suffocating, each word adding another layer to the tangled mess we'd created. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "Stop," I said, my voice breaking. "This isn't fair to any of us. I care about all of you, but I can't be what you need me to be right now." Alex's expression softened, his anger replaced by hurt. Marcus looked away, his jaw clenched, then nodded, his calm demeanor unwavering. "Then what do you need, Lisa?" Ben asked gently. "What can we do?" "I need space," I said, my voice trembling. "I need time to figure out how I feel, without the pressure of making a choice right now." The room fell silent again, the weight of my words settling over us. Finally, Alex nodded, though his expression remained guarded. "Take the time you need," he said, "but don't keep us waiting forever." Marcus didn't say anything, but the tension in his posture spoke volumes. Ben offered me a small, understanding smile. "We'll figure this out," he said, "together." The rest of the day passed in a blur. We kept our distance, each of us retreating into our own thoughts. I took a walk through the woods, the quiet of nature offering a brief reprieve from the chaos in my mind. By the time I returned to the cabin, the sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the porch. Alex and Marcus were sitting together, their conversation muted but tense. Ben was inside, flipping through a book but clearly not reading it. The fallout was far from over, but for the first time it felt like we were moving towards something. An understanding, a resolution, maybe even a chance to heal. Stepped forward, her elbows resting on the table. The days that followed felt like walking a tightrope. Every glance, every word exchanged, carried the weight of unspoken emotions. By unspoken agreement, we avoided the subject entirely. It was an uneasy truce, one that barely held together as we tiptoed around the cracks. I spent most of my time alone, either sketching by the fireplace or taking long walks through the woods. The fresh air cleared my head, but no amount of solitude could silence the memories of the weekend. Each of them, Alex, Ben, and Marcus, had left a mark on me, one I wasn't sure how to erase or reconcile. One morning, Ben found me sitting on the porch, sketchpad in hand. He approached quietly, his presence more soothing than startling. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. I shook my head and gestured to the chair beside me. He sat down, his gaze fixed on the horizon, where the morning sun bathed the trees in golden light. "You've been avoiding us," he said gently, breaking the silence. "I haven't been avoiding you," I replied, though we both knew it was a lie. He gave me a small, knowing smile. "It's okay, Lisa, I get it, but I want you to know that I'm here. Whatever you decide, I'll always be here." His words were a balm, soothing the ache of guilt and confusion that had been gnawing at me. I looked at him, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the storm swirling inside me. "Thank you," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Later that day, Marcus cornered me as I was returning from a walk. He was leaning against the porch railing, his usual energy tempered by something more serious. "Lisa," he began, his tone hesitant, "can we talk?" I nodded, bracing myself for another emotional conversation. "I'm sorry for how I acted," he said, his gaze earnest. "I let my frustration get the better of me, but I meant what I said. I care about you, and I don't want to lose what we have." "I care about you too, Marcus," I replied, "but I don't know if I can give you what you're looking for." His expression faltered, but he nodded. "I get it. I do. But if there's even a chance for us, I'm willing to wait." His words hung in the air, heavy with promise and uncertainty. I didn't know how to respond, so I simply nodded and walked inside, leaving him alone with his thoughts. Halem unearthed. It was Alex who finally shattered the fragile peace. He caught me alone in the living room one evening, his usual charm replaced by a quiet intensity. The minute we were alone together, "We need to settle this, Lisa," he said, his voice steady but firm. "I know," I replied, my chest tightening, "but I don't have the answers yet, Alex." He stepped closer, his gaze locking onto mine. "Then let me make it simple. I love you, Lisa. I've loved you for years, and I can't keep pretending that I don't." His confession was a punch to the gut, raw and vulnerable in a way I hadn't expected. I opened my mouth to respond, but he held up a hand to stop me. "You don't have to say anything," he continued. "Just think about it, and when you're ready, let me know." The next day we decided to leave the cabin early. The weekend had been planned as a getaway, a chance to reconnect, but it had become something far more complicated. None of us were ready to face what came next, so we packed up in silence and headed back to the city. The drive home was quiet, each of us lost in our own thoughts. Alex drove, his jaw tight as he focused on the road. Marcus sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window. Ben and I shared the back seat, the space between us heavy with unspoken words. When we finally reached my apartment, I hesitated before getting out of the car. "Thank you," I said, my voice trembling, "for everything." Alex nodded, his expression unreadable. Marcus offered me a small, sad smile. Ben gave my hand a reassuring squeeze. And then I was alone, standing on the curb as they drove away. Back in my apartment, the silence was deafening. The memories of the weekend played on a loop in my mind, each moment filled with both joy and heartache. I knew I couldn't avoid the truth any longer. I had to make a choice, not just about them, but about myself and what I wanted for my life. I sat down at my easel, the blank canvas staring back at me. Slowly, I picked up a brush and began to paint. The strokes were hesitant at first, but as the colors came together, they formed a picture of clarity and purpose. The weight of the weekend lingered like a shadow over the following days. I tried to throw myself into my art, but even the canvas couldn't silence the persistent thoughts of Alex, Marcus, and Ben. Each of them had left a piece of themselves with me, and I knew I couldn't move forward until I returned those pieces. Truthfully and completely. One by one, I reached out to them, asking to meet. Each conversation would need to happen alone. They deserved that much. Alex, we met at a quiet cafe near his office. He arrived first, sitting at a table by the window, his confident demeanor tempered by something softer. When I walked in, he stood, his smile tentative but warm. "Hey," he said, gesturing to the seat across from him. "Thanks for meeting me." "Of course," I replied, sitting down. The cafe buzzed with the sound of coffee machines and quiet chatter, but all I could focus on was Alex's piercing gaze. "I've been thinking about what you said," I began, my voice steady despite the nerves twisting in my stomach. "And I need you to know how much I care about you." He leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "But," I took a deep breath, "but I don't think I can be the person you need me to be. Not right now. You're incredible, Alex, and you deserve someone who can give you their whole heart. I'm not there yet." His jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Excellent. It's not what I was hoping to hear, but I appreciate your honesty. It's, I'm so sorry," I said, my voice breaking. "I never wanted to hurt you." He reached across the table, his hand covering mine. "You didn't, Lisa. You were honest. And that's all I could ever ask for." The conversation ended on a bittersweet note, Alex walking me to my car before pulling me into a gentle hug. "I'll always be here if you need me," he said softly. And with that, he was gone. Marcus suggested we meet at a park, a place he often went to clear his head. When I arrived, he was already there, pacing near a bench by the lake. He spotted me and smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Hey," he said, his voice light but strained. "You made it." "Of course," I replied, sitting down on the bench. He joined me, the space between us heavy with unspoken words. "Marcus," I began, my hands twisting in my lap. I need you to know how much your energy, your passion, has meant to me. You've always pushed me to be braver, to take risks." Gently pressing his lips to mine, he whispered, "I don't know how I've ever done it with you." He chuckled, though it lacked his usual confidence. But I think you're right, we're looking for different things," I said, my voice soft but firm. "You deserve someone who can match your adventurous spirit, someone who wants to dive headfirst into life with you. I'm not that person." He stared out at the lake, his jaw tight. "I knew this was coming," he said finally, "but it doesn't make it any easier." "I'm so sorry," I said, tears welling in my eyes. "Don't be," he replied, turning to face me. "You've always been honest with me, Lisa. That's more than I can say for most people." We sat in silence for a while, the sounds of the park filling the space between us. Finally, he stood and offered me a hand. "Let's walk," he said. "One last adventure." Ben was the hardest to face. We met at a small diner we'd frequented over the years, a place that felt more like a second home than a meeting spot. He was already seated when I arrived, his usual calm presence steadying my nerves. "Hi," I said, sliding into the booth across from him. "Hi," he replied, his smile warm but cautious. We ordered coffee, though neither of us touched it. The silence stretched between us, comfortable but heavy. "I've been thinking about us," I said finally, breaking the quiet, "about how much you mean to me." His brow furrowed slightly, but he didn't interrupt. "You've always been my rock, Ben," I continued, "the one I could count on when everything else felt uncertain. And I think that's part of the problem. I've relied on you so much that I never stopped to ask myself what I could give back." "Lisa," he began, but I shook my head. "Let me finish," I said. "You deserve someone who doesn't just depend on you, someone who can meet you halfway. And I don't know if I'm ready to be that person yet." His expression softened and he reached across the table to take my hand. "You're being too hard on yourself," he said gently. "But I understand, and I respect your decision." Tears welled in my eyes, but I managed a shaky smile. "Thank you, Ben, for everything." Moving forward. After the conversations, I felt lighter, though the ache of letting them go lingered. Each of them had given me something invaluable, a deeper understanding of myself and what I wanted from life. I returned to my apartment that evening and stared at the canvas I'd been working on. With newfound clarity, I picked up my brush and began to paint, the strokes bold and confident. For the first time in months, I felt like I was creating something real, something that truly reflected who I was. The gallery was buzzing with energy, the air alive with the hum of conversation and the clinking of glasses. I stood in the corner, a flute of champagne in hand, watching as people moved from painting to painting, their reactions as varied as the strokes on my canvas. The series was called 3 Days, a collection of works inspired by the cabin weekend that had changed everything. Each piece told a story, a swirl of emotions captured in color and form. There was the warmth of camaraderie, the fire of passion, the storm of conflict, and the bittersweet calm of resolution. It was the most personal work I'd ever created, and now it was on display for the world to see. I felt a familiar presence before I saw him. Turning, I found Alex standing a few feet away, his dark suit immaculate, his confident charm as magnetic as ever. "Impressive," he said, gesturing to the nearest painting. You've outdone yourself, Lisa. Thank you, I replied, smiling. It means a lot that you came. He nodded, his gaze softening. I wouldn't miss it for the world. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of our shared history lingering but no longer oppressive. Alex had moved on. He was seeing someone new, a woman who matched his vibrancy in ways I never could. And though a small part of me still felt the sting of what might have been, I was genuinely happy for him. I'm proud of you, he said finally. You've found your way. So have you, I replied, my smile genuine. She's good for you, Alex. His eyes sparkled with surprise, but he didn't deny it. She is, he admitted. But you'll always be a part of me, Lisa. Don't forget that. With a final smile, he squeezed my hand and disappeared into the crowd. Next was Marcus, his arrival as energetic as ever. He breezed into the gallery with a wide grin, his presence drawing attention as he made his way toward me. Look at you, he said, pulling me into a quick hug. An artist and a star. Hardly a star, I replied, laughing, but I'm glad you're here. Of course I'm here, he said, his grin unwavering. You're one of my favorite people. We chatted for a while, his stories as lively as ever. Marcus had thrown himself into his adventures, traveling the world and living life to the fullest. He showed me photos from his latest trip, a mountain climbing expedition in Patagonia, and I couldn't help but marvel at his fearless spirit. I said, "You should come with me next time," he said, his tone half joking but hopeful. I could use a little more Lisa in my life. I'll think about it, I replied, smiling. But I think you're doing just fine on your own. His grin faltered for a moment, replaced by something more sincere. You're amazing, Lisa. Don't ever forget that. And just like Alex, he was gone, swept away by the tide of the evening. Ben arrived last, his presence as steady and grounding as ever. He approached me quietly, his smile warm but reserved. The steward. This is incredible, he said, gesturing to the paintings. Every piece feels like it's alive. Thank you, I replied, my voice soft. I couldn't have done it without you. He tilted his head, his expression curious. Me? You've always been my rock, Ben, I said, even when I didn't realize it. You've taught me more about strength and patience than anyone else. His cheeks flushed slightly, but his smile remained. You've always had those things, Lisa. You just needed to see them for yourself. We stood together for a while, watching as the crowd admired the art. Ben had stayed in the city, pursuing his career with the quiet determination that defined him. He was happy, or at least at peace, and that was enough. Before he left, he turned to me with one last piece of advice. Keep creating, he said. The world needs your art. As the evening wound down and the gallery emptied, I found myself alone with my thoughts. The weekend at the cabin had been both a breaking point and a turning point. It had forced me to confront my feelings, my fears, and my flaws. But it had also given me the courage to choose myself, to prioritize my growth over the expectations of others. I had loved Alex's boldness, Marcus's passion, and Ben's steadiness, but I had learned to love my own complexity even more. Wyatt leaned his elbows on the desk, cradling his hands. The next day I returned to my studio, the faint scent of paint and turpentine greeting me like an old friend. A blank canvas stood waiting, a world of possibilities stretching before me. I picked up my brush, a smile tugging at my lips. This time, there was no confusion, no hesitation, only the thrill of creation and the joy of being exactly who I was. The first stroke was bold, the beginning of a new story. My story. After a weekend getaway with her 3 closest male friends, Lisa finds herself at the center of a whirlwind of emotions and confessions. As friendships blur into romance, she must navigate love, heartbreak, and self-discovery, ultimately choosing her own path. Through honest conversations and the passage of time, Lisa grows into her own person, finding peace in her art and the clarity to move forward. The weight of my choices hung over me like a storm cloud. Each day was a delicate balancing act, a constant juggling of emotions, lies, and guilt. Ian and I continued to steal moments together, but the exhilaration that once fueled our secret meetings was now tinged with paranoia. Every glance from a neighbor, every unexpected call from Daniel, felt like a thread threatening to unravel our fragile world. The close call. It was a sunny afternoon when I found myself at the coffee shop in town. I rarely ventured out these days, preferring the anonymity of my own home, but Ian had convinced me to meet him there. Just for a few minutes, he'd said. No one will think anything of it. But as I sat across from him, my nerves were on edge. Ian looked calm, sipping his coffee, like we weren't two people risking everything for stolen moments. You're quiet, he said, his voice low. I glanced around, my eyes darting to the entrance as if expecting someone to walk in and catch us. This feels risky, I admitted. Claire, relax, he said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. No one is watching us. But just as he said it, the door swung open and in walked one of Daniel's colleagues. Paul. My stomach dropped as his eyes scanned the room and landed on me. Hers exhaled in a sigh. Claire, he said, his voice cheerful. I forced a smile, pulling my hand away from Ian's just in time. Paul, hi. Paul walked over, his eyes flicking briefly to Ian before settling on me. What a surprise, running into you here. Daniel mentioned you've been busy at home. I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. Yes, just running a few errands. And who's this? Paul asked, nodding toward Ian. This is Ian, I said quickly, Daniel's brother. He's helping with some things around the house while Daniel's away. Ian gave Paul a polite nod, his expression unreadable. Well, that's nice of you, Paul said, smiling. Tell Daniel I said hello. I will, I said, my heart pounding as he walked away. Ian leaned back in his chair, a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. You handled that well. Too well, I muttered, feeling the weight of yet another lie. Daniel's growing suspicion. That evening, Daniel called. His voice was warm at first, but there was an edge to it I hadn't heard in years. Paul mentioned he saw you today, he said casually. Oh? Yes, I ran into him at the coffee shop, I replied, forcing a lightness into my tone. He said Ian was with you, Daniel continued, his words slow and deliberate. I hesitated, my heart skipping a beat. Yes. He was helping me with a few things around the house and wanted to grab a coffee. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I thought Daniel was going to press further. But then he let out a small laugh. That's good of him. I know I've been away a lot lately. You have, I said softly, the guilt threatening to choke me. I'll make it up to you when I'm home, he said, his voice filled with a sincerity that only deepened the ache in my chest. The breaking point. The tension between Ian and me grew as the days went on. Our stolen moments became fewer and more fraught, each one tinged with the fear of being discovered, and yet neither of us could bring ourselves to stop. One evening, Ian showed up unannounced again. I opened the door to find him standing there, his expression tense. "We need to talk," he said, stepping inside. "About what?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "This," he said, gesturing between us. "It's tearing you apart, Claire. I can see it." "I don't know what to do," I admitted, tears welling in my eyes. "Then let me decide for you," he said, his voice firm. "Leave with me. We'll figure it out together." His words hung in the air, heavy with possibility, but the reality of what he was asking hit me like a tidal wave. My heart beat so hard I thought, "I can't," I said, shaking my head. "I can't leave Daniel. He doesn't deserve this." "And what about what you deserve?" Ian asked, his voice rising. "Don't you deserve to be happy?" "I don't know anymore," I whispered, the tears spilling over. Ian stepped closer, his hands gently cupping my face. "You deserve more than this, Claire. More than a life spent pretending." I closed my eyes, leaning into his touch. For a moment, I let myself imagine it, a life with Ian, free from the weight of lies and guilt. But reality came crashing back, and I pulled away. "I can't," I repeated, my voice breaking. Ian's jaw tightened and he nodded slowly. "Then I'll go," he said quietly. "But I'm not giving up on you, Claire. Not yet." "Yes!" As he walked out the door, the weight of my choices pressed down on me. The line we had crossed was no longer just a secret. It was a ticking time bomb, and I knew it was only a matter of time before it all came to light. The cabin had gone from feeling like a safe haven to a pressure cooker. Every glance, every word exchanged seemed to add to the simmering tension. By the third evening, it was clear that something had to give. The lines we'd carefully tiptoed around were beginning to blur, and the unspoken truths between us demanded to be aired. It began innocently enough, a late-night campfire outside, surrounded by the deep stillness of the woods. The stars above were breathtaking, scattered across the sky like tiny jewels. Alex poked at the fire with a stick, his jaw tight, while Marcus leaned back in his chair, his usual restless energy conspicuously absent. Ben sat beside me, his calm quieter than usual. "I think we need to talk," Alex said finally, breaking the silence. His voice was steady but carried the weight of a storm brewing beneath the surface. Marcus rolled his eyes. "Oh, here we go." Alex ignored him, his gaze fixed on the flames. "We've been dancing around this all weekend, and it's driving me insane. Lisa, we need to know where you stand." The bluntness of his words made my stomach twist. I opened my mouth to respond, but Marcus cut in. "Why does she have to choose right now?" he snapped, his frustration bubbling over. "This isn't some damn competition, Alex." "Maybe it isn't to you," Alex shot back, his voice rising. "But some of us have been holding back feelings for years. I'm tired of pretending everything's fine." Ben cleared his throat, his tone calm but firm. "We're all feeling the same way, Alex, but shouting at each other isn't going to fix anything." "Then what's your brilliant solution?" Alex retorted, turning his anger toward Ben. "Sit quietly and hope everything magically works out?" "Enough," I said, my voice cutting through the tension. All three of them turned to look at me, their expressions a mix of surprise and expectation. My heart pounded in my chest as I searched for the right words. Slowly, "You're all putting me in an impossible position," I said, my voice trembling. "I care about each of you so much, but I don't know what that means yet. I came here this weekend hoping to relax, not to have my entire world turned upside down. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus looked away, his jaw tight. Ben stared at the ground, his expression unreadable. Alex's gaze softened, though the frustration in his eyes remained. "You came to say goodbye?" I began, but the words caught in my throat. "I just need time to figure this out." "I know." Alex sighed, running a hand through his hair. "And what are we supposed to do in the meantime, Lisa? Sit around and wait for you to decide who you want?" "That's not fair," Ben said quietly, his tone steady. "She didn't ask for any of this." "No, but we're all here because of her," Alex replied, his voice sharp. "We're all in love with the same woman, and none of us know what to do about it." Marcus stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the ground. "Speak for yourself," he said, his voice cold. "I'm not in love with anyone." The words stung, though I could see the lie in his eyes. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness of the woods. The sound of his footsteps faded, leaving the rest of us in tense silence. The next morning, the atmosphere was suffocating. Marcus had returned late in the night, his usual energy replaced with a brooding silence. Alex was distant, his sharp edges dulled by exhaustion. Ben was the only one who seemed somewhat steady, though even he carried a weight he couldn't hide. I decided to take a walk, needing space to clear my head. The forest was quiet, the air cool and fresh. The sound of my footsteps on the dirt path was soothing, a rhythm that helped steady my racing thoughts. Yet, I wasn't alone for long. Alex appeared on the trail behind me, his steps quick as he caught up. I felt his warm body press against mine as he walked. "Lisa," he called out, his voice softer than I expected. I stopped, turning to face him. His expression was a mix of vulnerability and determination, a side of him I rarely saw. "Can we talk?" he asked. I nodded, unsure of what else to do. He gestured toward a fallen log, and we sat down together. The forest around us, a cocoon of privacy. "I'm sorry," he began, his voice low, "for how I acted last night. I was out of line." "It's okay," I said quickly, though the memory of his anger still lingered. "This situation is hard for all of us." He shook his head. "That doesn't excuse it. I've been carrying these feelings for so long, Lisa. And seeing you with Marcus, with Ben, it's killing me." I looked down at my hands, unsure of how to respond. "I didn't mean for this to happen," I said softly. "I never wanted to hurt any of you." "I know," he said, his hand brushing against mine. "But you have to understand, it's not just about the weekend. I've loved you for years, Lisa, and I need to know if there's even a chance for us." The intensity of his words made my heart ache. I wanted to give him an answer, but I wasn't ready. "Alex, I care about you," I said carefully, "but I can't give you what you're asking for right now." "Done. Indulge me." His jaw tightened, but he nodded. "I just needed to hear it," he said, his voice resigned. "Thank you for being honest." I huffed out a breath. When we returned to the cabin, Marcus was waiting on the porch, his arms crossed and his expression stormy. He watched us approach, his gaze narrowing. "What's this?" he asked, his tone sharp. "Another heart-to-heart?" "Marcus," Alex warned, but I stepped between them before the tension could escalate. "Stop," I said, my voice firm. "This isn't helping." Marcus's eyes softened as he looked at me, his frustration giving way to something more vulnerable. "I'm sorry," he muttered, shoving his hands into his pockets. I don't know how to handle this." None of us did. The weekend that was supposed to bring us closer together had only highlighted the cracks in our friendships. But it had also forced us to confront truths we'd been avoiding for far too long. That evening, we sat around the fire one last time, the weight of the weekend pressing down on us. No one spoke for a long time, the silence filled only by the crackling of the flames. Finally, Ben broke the quiet. "No matter what happens, I don't want this to destroy what we have," he said, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "We've been through too much to let this break us. We should live up to this. Let them breathe." Alex nodded, though his expression remained guarded. Marcus said nothing, but the tension in his posture eased slightly. I looked at each of them, my heart heavy but resolute. "I don't have all the answers," I said, my voice trembling. "But I promise I'll do whatever it takes to make things right." The fire crackled, casting flickering shadows on their faces. For the first time all weekend, it felt like we were moving towards something uncertain, but necessary. The turning point had arrived. What came next would define everything. Over the following days, I buried myself in my art, trying to make sense of the tangled emotions left in the wake of the cabin trip. My studio became my sanctuary, the smell of paint and the scratch of a brush on canvas grounding me in a way nothing else could. I poured everything I felt onto the canvas, the confusion, the guilt, the love, and the loss. Each stroke was a catharsis, each color a step toward clarity. But even as I painted, the memories lingered. I replayed every conversation, every glance, every touch. I thought about Alex's vulnerability, Marcus's fire, and Ben's quiet steadiness. Each of them had brought something different into my life, and for that I was grateful. But I also knew that I couldn't keep holding on to them, not in the way they wanted me to. I needed to let go, not just for their sake, but for mine.